pretty interesting. Roman has been part of a 3-person team helping UVA with National Collegiate Cyber Defense Championship the last 3 years in a row, helping them win the National Collegiate Cyber Defense Championship in the last 3 years in a row. And his company's called MetaCTF. And I am going to turn it over now to Roman.
Thank you for the introduction. So it's actually an 8-person team, not a 3-person team. But I think you're muted.
That's the information I was given, so thanks for correcting me.
Well, just want to give the credit to the rest of the folks who are on the team, but thank you for having me. Really excited to be here. So I guess I can give you kind of an introduction to my company. So I think the story begins about 7 years ago, back when I was in high school, and my friend and I we participated in a few cybersecurity competitions ourselves. And we decided to do something similar for our classmates. And so we put together a few challenges, wrote a platform, and organized competition. And the competition format, and the competition was called a Capture the Flag competition, which is a very common format in cybersecurity. And the idea is that participants are presented with a list of different technical challenges in a variety of different categories that are fit a variety of different levels, difficulty levels, and as competitors, you need to use some cybersecurity skill to obtain a flag, and a flag is just a piece of text. It's a string that that the participants can then exchange for points. So for example, an example challenge might be breaking into a vulnerable web application to steal some credentials or steal some data. Well, the web application is fake, so it's not a real web application they have to break into, but it's something that we build that is purposefully vulnerable, that is designed to kind of demonstrate how easy it is to break into certain things, with the goal of helping people understand how to secure similar applications as well. Another type of challenge might be looking at some kind of log file. So for example, if it's a web server log or a system log, you have to find traces of malicious activity, and then you have to maybe find the IP address of the attacker, and then you'll get the points that way. Another example challenge might be looking at a executable that is supposed to be malicious, and you have to reverse engineer it and understand what it does. And so we organized a competition like this about 7 years ago. It was never meant to be a company. It was just a fun way for my friend and I to help others at our school get excited about cybersecurity, learn a few more things. But then a few years ago, Longwood University approached us to actually do something similar for students in one of their cybersecurity classes. And so we took all the content we've made and just ran a competition for them. And then a few months after that, we organized, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Mass Science Innovation Center in Richmond, but we wrote a summer course for them in cybersecurity, kind of using all the same kind of questions and content for that as well. And then, soon after that, we came to a cybersecurity conference in Richmond called RBASEC, and we helped organize a similar competition there. And so over the years, we've been getting more and more potential clients and been running more and more events. And at some point, we realized that we can't really do this for free as volunteers anymore, and so we decided to turn it into a company. And so at this point, about 2 years ago, we officially started the process of becoming a company. We started learning about what it means to be an entrepreneur. We met Damon DeVito through one of the classes at UVA. He's been very helpful in helping our company get started. And so since then, for about 2 years, we've been trying to grow as a business and run similar Capture the Flag competitions as a service. And the our main product is we developed a custom cybersecurity a custom educational platform that lets us run these competitions for a variety of different reasons, for a variety of different purposes. So, for example, one company might want to organize an event for their employees as a way to kind of just provide a fun team activity. So it might be a competition for just 20 people, and the entire purpose is to teach them, is to give them a challenge, teach them kind of a few new skills, but primarily give them a team activity to do together. Another company might want us to run a competition that is company wide for 200 or 400 people, to help not only the security practitioners at the company get better at what they do, but at the same time introduce developers and non-technical folks to cybersecurity to improve the cybersecurity posture of the company as a whole. We also run competitions for companies that are looking to recruit university students, and I'll get back into that later, but we haven't actually run a lot of these competitions, but over the years we realized that our platform is very good at helping companies source talent. So for example, we might go to a university, or we might go to some kind of conference, and a lot of students are very interested in cybersecurity, and they want to get jobs. And so we can use our platform to capture the talent, to screen their skills through the competition, and also teach them something new. Let's see. So up until now, our main line of business has been running these competitions. They're customized, for a variety of organizations, but we recently realized that it's not a very scalable business model, because I think the word custom and scalable don't really go together in the same sentence. And so we started looking for other venues to make money. And so since we run competitions, over the years we've compiled a large library of content, and it's content that covers a variety of different difficulty levels. So we've organized competitions for everybody from middle school students to several professional teams at top cybersecurity companies or Fortune 500 companies. And since we have all this content, we can't really reuse it all that much, because we run competitions, and as soon as we use it once, and if the same person participates in one of our competitions again, we can't always reuse the same content, and so we just have this huge library of challenges and labs that aren't necessarily being used. And so one of the things we're looking to do is actually start releasing our content over time for free, as a way to attract students and professionals who are interested in either getting into the field or learning or improving their skills, giving them the option of giving them the option to opt into our recruiting offerings, and then as a company we can then go to other companies or headhunters or recruiters and help them find talent through from the pool of candidates that we have. Let's see. So I guess that brings me to kind of my current ask. How much time do I have to shoot? I can still talk more about other kind of aspects of our company, or I can get into the ask.
It'd probably be a good time to get into the ask.
Okay.
They can ask you other questions about your company as we go.
Sounds good. So we have a way to effectively and consistently find cybersecurity folks and people interested in cybersecurity. We have a way to teach them. We have a way to give them new skills and keep them interested and keep them coming. But we don't really know where to take this further. We have a lot of ideas of how to approach different recruiters, how to present the information we have to them, but we don't really have enough experience in the field to be sure that our ideas are actually make sense. And so right now we're in the process of working with a company to help us redevelop our website, to implement a few new features, and we're at a point where we need to figure out the specifics of kind of what questions to ask the participants, and then what information the recruiters would be interested in, to be able to hire people effectively. So maybe they have 17 different criteria, and then they have to narrow down by at least 5 or 6 for it to be useful. And so we're trying to figure out what those criteria are. And I guess my ask is, well, first of all, if anybody has any recruiters that they know of and that they might be able to introduce me to, but at the same time, kind of knowing what we have. So for example, knowing that we have all this content and knowing what platform we have, how can we get into the recruiting market, and how and do you think and do you see potential in that? I think you're muted.
Thanks, Roman, for being my mute assistant here. Can everybody hear me okay? I know there was a little bit of a problem before. Is everything all right?
Yeah, that static is going away.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what that was. Thank you very much, Roman. That was terrific. And as it sounds like you're making a transition to kind of help the pipeline, so to speak, with people with these skills. So at this stage, anybody have solutions, suggestions, anything for Roman? Go right ahead. Yeah, you can physically raise your hand or do it with an emoji. Tracy, it looks like she has something right away.
I always have something to say, don't I? Well, there's actually three things that come to mind. One is our host, who usually is here, Hope McCutcheon. She is a recruiter, and she does focus in the tech space. So I definitely put you in touch specifically for that purpose. And the other is a woman named Sarah from Relish Careers. It's a local startup. Are you familiar with Relish Careers?
I am. So I actually met with Hope a few weeks ago.
Great.
But I do know Sarah. Back when I was at iLab, she was one of the speakers there.
Mm-hmm.
But I would love an introduction
To Sarah?
To Sarah, because I don't know her personally. And
yeah, I'd be happy to make that introduction. And then the third thing I had in mind was, and I'll have to go do the research because I've forgotten the name of it, but there is a cybersecurity accelerator out of the Blacksburg Roanoke region. Are you familiar with that?
I know of Mach 37, but I don't know if it's the same one as you're referring to.
It might be. Yeah, I think that's the name of it. Are you connected with them, and have you had any strategic conversations with anybody there?
I was connected to them about 6 years ago, back in high school, but since then I think everybody, the entire team there changed, and so at this point I don't really have any connections.
I bet if you just cold call him, he'd be fine. But I'd be happy to make an introduction.
I'd love that too. But I appreciate it.
Okay, very good.
Larry?
Hey, Roman. I'm curious about the reason to pivot to recruiters. When I was running a software team, this is exactly the thing I was looking for. Something I could take my team off of projects, between projects, put them on, because I'm always talking to them about security, and they're always going, yeah. Well, this would have been fantastic. So it sounds like you've done that. It sounds like you have reached out to software teams that exist. You have had competitions. But I'm thinking of like an alternative to a ropes course or something. People take their teams out to all sorts of things to build camaraderie, teach them skills and stuff. This just seems like a perfect match for software teams. So I'm just kind of curious about the reason for the pivot and whether you've had success with that, or whether I'm an outlier that I would want my software team to go do all the events that you offer. Thanks.
So I think at this point we actually organized close to over 50 different competitions for companies, universities, organizations, and about 50% of them were for small teams, at organizations looking to get better cybersecurity. I think one of the things we've always been struggling with is pricing, and every company has very different expectations about what they can pay. For some company, we can approach and give them $100, $200 per user fee, and then we go to a different company and they can only pay $500 total for the entire project. And we haven't been able to find that many companies who are able to kind of pay enough to make it kind of worth our time and effort. And we talked to a lot of other companies who've been in this field, and they said that it's very difficult to make money running competitions like these. And so we're still doing it, but we're looking kind of we're trying to only work with big companies, because at the point our platform is not very, it takes a lot of time to set up each competition, and so it's not very scalable. We can't just with the click of a button, press of a button, organize an event. So we have to put a lot of time and effort into it. And so I think that's why we're trying to find kind of more scalable approaches. But I think once we re-implement our platform, that might might be more feasible to do that as well, because it'll be faster to spin up different competitions.
Just a quick follow-up on that. I mean, if you take a software team off of a project for a full day, I mean, everybody on this call knows what that costs. I mean, we're into $10, $12, $15,000 really quickly. We haven't even paid you anything yet. But if the story is it worth doing that? You know, what's it worth to have, say, you know, a world-class agile coach come into your office and speak? Well, that's worth a couple $1,000s. What's it worth to have a world-class cybersecurity competition hosted with your software team, say, playing against another team in your organization or something like that? It could be worth twice that. I don't know, but it just seems like yeah, I understand people won't want to pay, especially because their software teams are idle, you know, but there's nothing that drives anybody crazy like that. But the money's large, and I would think it's got to be there, but I don't know. That's a marketing problem, probably.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you.
That makes sense. I really appreciate that. I think I'll talk to the team, and you know, it might make more sense to. Damon DeVito has always been pushing us to do more marketing, because our entire team is very technical, so we're not very good at talking to people. And I think that's maybe one of the other reasons we decided to find easier solutions where we don't have to talk to people as much. But I think that makes sense. And so I'll, yeah, definitely, you know, I appreciate the feedback.
Roman, this is Don. I'm thinking a little bit differently. I came from a very large oil and gas company where every one of us was a potential way for our company to get hacked. And if you hacked 6 of our facilities, you would shut down 10% of the world's oil and gas. And I'm just wondering, how have you thought about these competitions maybe more in a training aspect? Because every single employee in my company was bombarded with things from our IT department to try and make sure we were all very attuned to the different ways that we could be hacked. But it got boring. To be honest, something new that comes from outside, like yours, is a training course, whether it was 2 hours or whatever, you know, and then you get into companies that have 10,000, 20,000 employees, and you could run the same thing over and over again. Just a thought, if you've thought about going from competition, you know, having a few tools in your toolbox of what you would market.
So we did something similar. We approach companies and tell them that, you know, we have a way to, whenever we run these competitions, we try to make sure that the vulnerable applications or the vulnerable programs that we give participants to look at are similar to what the company has themselves, and with the idea is that if they can break into one of our applications that is similar to theirs, they'll be better at securing. Well, first of all, understanding how easy it is to break into some of these applications, but at the same time, we try to show them how to make them more secure and how to fix those vulnerabilities. I think this goes back to marketing, because we well, I'm really happy, kind of, you know, all you're bringing up this point because I think for the past few months we've been going in one direction, but I think we've never really considered kind of these venues, even though there's a lot of potential there too.
Because while you're very technical and you're very interested in the software space and vulnerabilities, an example is just teaching some of the boring stuff to people. Of you get a spam email that has a link to your invoicing system, and the next thing you know, the U.S. Treasury is sending $62 billion to Bangladesh, which is a true story.
Well, I think we're trying to stay away from this cybersecurity awareness market. I think we're definitely more technical, because I think that requires a lot more introductory kind of lessons, and more just kind of lesson building and presentations that I think we're not as good at. But I think still, even in the more technical space, there's still a lot of demand for it too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other suggestions or questions for Roman? Roman, I was just curious about the fact that you have this skill in building these competitions. It seems to me that can always be leveraged as a marketing device, keep you out in the public, run larger competitions, that kind of thing. And you could be known as that company with that kind of expertise, and then introduce your other lines of services. Just a thought, because it's like almost like a calling card, right?
Yep. I think someone also mentioned recommended that, one of our mentors. I think I think that is kind of the idea that we're trying to go towards with free competitions and competitions that are open to the public. And that's actually where we got the idea to go into the recruiting market, because we organized a competition in October where we had over 3,000 participants from all over the world, and 500 of them uploaded a resume to us, and then 1,600 of them expressed interest in being recruited, and so we saw that there's a lot of our sponsors were desperately looking for cybersecurity folks, and then there are just hundreds and hundreds of resumes that are coming our way. That's where we got the idea of kind of trying to be a middleman and try and match students with companies.
Yeah, it sounds like a great idea, because you could put on these competitions with partners, strategic partners, and yeah, very good. Anybody else? Well, thank you, Roman. Roman, if you'll put in the chat your contact information, and then if anybody has any further suggestions or wants to reach out to Roman, they can. Also, he'll be in his own breakout room in just a little bit, and you can chat with him further. Thanks so much for sharing your stuff with us, Roman. Really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for contributing to him. So we're going to now introduce our Crash and Learn speaker. We're lucky enough to have Mike Chinn here with us. I'm told that Mike grew up in Tappahannock. He can tell us about that, a small town with 5 traffic lights. I don't wonder if they still have 5. He came to Seville for UVA and graduated in '94 with a degree in economics and history. Like a lot of people hung around, or a lot of people like to, he stayed around Seville and wanted a resume builder. So he started working at SNL as a financial analyst. Everybody remembers SNL. Just 6 years later, before the age of 30, he was president of the company. And 8 years from there, he was CEO, helping them to scale and expand globally. He also helped the company through its acquisition by S&P Global, and was named president of the new division, which included SNL. 2 years ago, he made a transition to partner at Endicott Growth Equity Partners, an investment firm servicing middle market financial institutions. Mike is also a huge UVA sports fan, as he should be, and has 2 teenagers, 3 dogs, and 2 cats. He says the cats are definitely the most civilized of the bunch. So join me in welcoming Mike Chinn, who will share some of the experiences with us.
Thanks, Craig. Thanks everybody for having me. I've known Tracy for a long time. Whatever I forget, it was the Virginia Piedmont Technology Council was the original part of this group, I think. And
that's right, you got it.
Is that right?
Yep, you got it.
And I was sort of involved early on. So, anyways, great to be here. I appreciate you guys having me. We sort of laughed. So I spent, as Craig said, by the way, there are probably maybe 8 or 9 stoplights and a Walmart in Tappahannock now, but it's a small place if any of you guys have been through there. We laugh. I spent 25 years basically with the same company, which is unusual these days, and has been unusual, I think, for a while. We sort of laugh with some of my former colleagues when you look back at the revenue growth chart it looks really nice and smooth, and looks like everything must have been extraordinarily well organized over a very long period of time. But you all know this, that when you're in the middle of the fray, it certainly doesn't feel anything like that. So it was a great business. It was a ton of fun. I don't consider myself to be an entrepreneur, really. I think of myself as more of a manager of growing businesses than I am a real sort of entrepreneur. The guy who started SNL, a guy named Reed Nagel, was very much an entrepreneur, and I work with a lot of them today. But great admiration for people who start companies, and I don't put myself in that category. But I guess just a few things, and a couple things that Roman mentioned that I'll try to pick up. I guess what I thought about here was just some things that I saw and learned over time that I think are applicable whether you're in the startup phase or doing what I did for about 3.5 years after we were acquired by S&P, which was to run it was about a $2 billion revenue division of a Fortune 500 company. And it was interesting when we showed up at S&P, and SNL, for those of you, maybe I'll just give you a little quick history. It's a business to business subscription data and analytics business, for those of you who haven't been in Charlottesville or didn't know it for very long. So we had think of it as a data manufacturing process. Humans and technology building very deep, rich, financially oriented information. So the kind of information that Wall Street firms, banks, insurance companies, and others needed in order to make big decisions, investment decisions, acquisition decisions, and those sorts of things. And so that's what we did. It was a classic build once, sell many times business. So just tremendous scale, because once we built the product, it was all digitally distributed. Once we built the product, it just scaled incredibly well. And so we sold the exact same product to 5,000 or 10,000 different customers. Really no variation whatsoever, no consulting, nothing really. Just wonderful scale and operating leverage characteristics in the business. So that's what it did. It was a great sort of sat at the intersection of sort of financial institutions and technology. And today, the information economy is, data is the new oil, all this kind of stuff. We were doing that long before all the latest slogans have come along. So wonderful business. When we showed up at S&P, SNL was about a $300 million revenue business when we sold it to S&P, and I used to get a lot of questions from my new S&P colleagues. Well, this must be really different. This must be a whole different experience. And actually, what I found is that the principles that made us successful at 5 million in revenue were by and large the exact same ones that were going to make us successful at 2 billion of revenue. I think business is business. I think leadership is leadership. I think the right operating principles and the right approach, for the most part, are the same. And I thought I would maybe just share a few things that I learned over time that I think were as applicable at what Roman is doing as a startup, and what we were doing as a multi-billion-dollar business. So maybe I'll jump into those. I think the first one, and there are three, and then I'm happy to save time for questions, which is sort of what I prefer. The first one that we found incredibly valuable over time. I think SNL was always a company with a very strong culture. If you talk to anyone from the founder on down to sort of entry level people, I think you would hear a lot of the same sort of mantras around what made the business successful, and maybe more importantly, what was important to the business. So one of the things that I found very, very valuable over time was actually to write down what we believed in for better of a case. I think Tony Bennett, for those of you who are EVA fans, and I think this is true of leaders regardless of domain, what they believe in, Tony Bennett's got the 5 pillars. We had the 4 pillars of data quality back at SNL back in the late 80s and early 90s. And I think it was incredibly valuable to write down what we believed in. I have not found that at all the companies that we've interacted with over the time. A lot of times what you'll see are values on the wall, respect and integrity and all these things, which are great things, but they don't really tell you how the company wants to operate and what they believe in. It tells you at a very superficial level. What we found really valuable was to write down the 5 or 6 operating principles through which and by which we wanted to run the company every day. And we talked about it all the time with new employees, with existing employees. If we ever changed them, we talked about it. And I think, these are the things that bound the company together. They served as the real fabric of the culture, and they help guide decision making. So if you're ever not sure about what to do, truly, you could sort of refer back to the operating principles and say, oh yeah, we said we were going to think for the long term. This is a short-term decision. We're not going to make a short-term decision. We're going to stick to our principles, and we're going to make a decision we think is going to be worth it, 3 or 4 years from now. So that was that was incredibly valuable. And I think as we got bigger, those became even more important. As we expanded all over the world, those became even more important. As we were integrating people from different cultures, we had huge teams of people in places like India and in the Philippines and in Pakistan and in Japan and in London. And I think that these plain English operating principles, very understandable, were a huge part of trying to knit the company together as we got bigger. So anyway, so that's the first. The second one, I think, is around, and certainly, our business, we had no assets really other than our people. We didn't make anything. Everything that we made stuff, but it was all distributed, in electrons. We didn't have plants, and we didn't have physical anything other than maybe a few servers. So the whole, 85% of the costs were people, and the talent part of that was just so critical. I think the 2 things that I learned the hard way, and then it got easier over time. The first is that the team that made us successful early on was not necessarily gonna be able to scale with the business. And there were some hard decisions to make over time as we got bigger and more complicated about who could step up and continue to scale with the business and could grow at least as fast as the business was growing in terms of their skill sets, and who needed to find a different role, whether it was with our company or not. SNL was an incredibly homegrown, somewhat insular place for the first 15 or 20 years of its existence. And I would say only once we figured out how to integrate people from the outside into that very strong culture did we really take off. And we were terrible at that for 15 years. And then we got pretty good at it for the last 10. And that's when the business really started to grow and mature in a way that took advantage of our potential. So I had a board member once who told me, who was a longtime CEO, who told me that you would never look back on a talent decision and decide that you had moved too fast. And that stuck with me. It's still true to this day. Whether it's deciding you need to hire in a new position because someone can't keep doing 3 or 4 jobs, or whether it's moving and sort of upgrading or getting somebody in who can better scale with the company. It's true today that if I look back, there was never an instance where I moved too fast, always too slow on those things. And, just something you sort of have to battle, because human nature to sort of resist those kind of changes. So that's bucket number 2. And then the third one, and Roman, I was smiling as you were talking about being a very technical group who is loath perhaps to expand your marketing organization or your revenue function as quickly as maybe you should. I would say that SNL was very much the same. So the company was founded in '87, and by 2002, company had about $20 million in revenue, which is not bad. Very steady growth, sort of 10, 12% a year from 0 to 20 million. But we were dramatically underinvested on the revenue generating functions. We didn't have the right head of sales. We just didn't simply have enough boots on the ground. We were out selling to businesses, so it was much more of a sales function than it was a marketing function. And we, through an acquisition, acquired a very small company, but who happened to have a CEO who would become our head of sales. And so if in the first 15 years, we grew from 0 to 20 million, in the next 13 years, we grew from 20 to 300. And that was mostly the result of building a revenue generating function that was as good as our product function. We were like a lot of these companies in our space. We were a product company. We knew very well how to solve problems of our customers. We just weren't very good at figuring out how to maximize the revenue at scale. Just weren't invested enough. And the very best investment that you can make in any sort of B2B business is to just add salespeople. As long as your market is big enough, add salespeople. Add them. We had the same board member who told me that I would never regret moving quickly on a talent decision. First board meeting, he sat down and he said, after we went through all of our presentations, he said, "So when are we doubling the size of the sales force?" And we sort of, what? Why? That sounds expensive. He's like, "Trust me, best decision you'll ever make, especially in a recurring revenue business like we had. We'd sell a subscription, it would last for 19 years. And we should put a whole lot more time and energy into capturing new business on the front end because it would last so long." So anyway, those are the three. I can certainly sympathize with Roman. I would say that in what I do now, which is invest in sort of sub $50 million data and information businesses, I would say that 9 out of 10 founders that we talk to, they're all incredibly tuned in to their market and to their product and to their customer base. 9 out of 10 of them have made the same sort of mistake or not had the same light bulb come off. Same issue that we had back in the early 2000s. They don't have the right head of revenue, and they're not investing enough in the sales function, which is great for us because we come in and we've sort of seen that we can help them through that learning curve pretty quickly, much quicker, hopefully, than we figured it out on our own. The summary of that is, it certainly in any business, but certainly in any kind of B2B business, there's a high likelihood that you're underinvested and have under-engineered your sales and marketing function, and truly it puts a tremendous cap on your growth. It just does, and especially if you're in a business that has really strong operating leverage, there's nothing better than driving $1 of additional revenue. So those are the sort of three big things that I think apply regardless of size of your company. Write down what you believe in and talk about it all the time with your people and with your customers. 2, talent decisions are everything. Hiring that incremental person or incremental leader, and then making sure that you are challenging your best people and finding new homes for people who aren't going to scale. And then whatever you think you're investing in your revenue function, it's absolutely should be more. So those are the 3 big things. Just last thing, I guess maybe before we open it up. So I made a career transition. I was ready to get out of the sort of CEO seat a couple of years ago. I ended up joining a former colleague of mine who had started a private equity firm to invest in the stuff that we know, which are recurring revenue, B2B data and analytics businesses. And I'll say it's just been a ton of fun to get back to working with founders and entrepreneurs who are so enthusiastic and have so much energy for these companies that they're creating. I think what we try to do, because we're operators at heart, is that's our pitch to them, that you can work with us rather than just with some deal person who doesn't know a whole lot about your space and wants to be helpful. You can actually work with with people who've done this before, and again, all the stuff I've already talked about, it just applies in spades in these smaller companies, and that's what we try to help them do. So Craig, maybe I'll stop there, and thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Mike. That was terrific. Does anybody want to start out here? Have a question for Mike?
Mike, that was great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mike's mic drop.
Mike's mic drop.
Don't be shy, guys. Go ahead and unmute yourself, raise your hands, put something in the chat. You know, we do also have the breakout sessions that you can go, and you'll have a room for going to speak with Roman and a room for going to speak with Mike. If you want to have some little personalized conversations or continue the dialogue, but let's hear what you guys have to say.
So Mike, I have a quick question.
Sure.
And you mentioned this idea of investing in sales, and you're probably never invested enough in sales. That's, I think, for a lot of companies, a hard transition to make. I think because, like you said, your first reaction was it sounds expensive, right? So how do you make that transition? Is that something where you wait till you have, like a smaller company, for example, wait till they have enough capital standing by? Do you just take a leap of faith? Do you take a loan out? How does a smaller company that wants to really scale their sales make that transition, do you think?
Yeah, it's certainly a challenging decision. I think what typically happens is that the CEO is the one generating most of the revenue, or in these smaller companies. And I think part of what you have to do is simply look at the math and actually think really hard. And again, it like in a consumery business, it might be different, because I don't understand that world. And I think marketing, if what you're trying to do is generate business through marketing, meaning not having salespeople calling customers, but sort of doing it through marketing, I think it is harder, because marketing, as we all know, it's so much harder to measure. It is more of a leap of faith, for sure. If you have the ability to hire, producing salespeople, and don't think used car salesmen, think like, really, sophisticated, a lot of products these days, especially if you're in technology, incredibly hard to sell them. I think you have to sort of do the math. And I think sometimes just doing that will show you, if I make this investment, let's say in $150,000 a year person, and I believe that they're going to produce 400 or 500, whatever a reasonable amount of production is. Yes, the first 6 months of that, they're probably not going to produce anything. So you have to think about sort of that cost, which I think is probably the hardest to get over, the fact that there's a lag. I think it would be very easy for founders to say, oh, if I hire somebody on Friday and they're starting to produce revenue on Monday, that's a much easier thing. You have to get your head around what the ramp up time is. But that, so maybe you're the first $90,000 of that is not going to produce anything. But once that starts kicking in, that's going to do everything. And frankly, if you're the CEO and you're spending all of your time producing revenue, the other parts you have to think of is what's the opportunity cost of that. Right. And if you can reinvest that time in all of the other things that you would like to be doing, or probably frankly would add more value doing, I think you have to factor that into your equation too. But I think, for instance, if you're going to go out and raise $1 million or raise $2 million, I would just say, think about how much. It's not a bad thing to talk to investors about. Yes, we want to raise $500,000 for R&D to build out these 12 product features, but we're also going to invest $500,000 in hiring 2 or 3 salespeople so that we can actually start generating revenue quicker than we would otherwise if we're going to rely on the CEO and a couple of other people to do it. So
it sounds like when you guys invest, you like to hear that in a pitch.
Definitely. Absolutely. And when we're coming in, again, the single biggest thing that we see if we're coming in, and it depends what nature of the transaction, but if we're actually putting capital in, we would expect a big chunk of it to go to scaling the sales and marketing function, no doubt.
Great. All right. Other questions for Mike?
Yeah, I have a question. Hi, Mike. So I actually, in a former life, used to use SNL a little bit for work. So this is funny. But
Where were you, Anthony?
I was at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Sure.
So we were like, I was in the Office of Supervision, and so we would have different financial institutions in our portfolio, and we had Excel VBA that we were just pulling in stuff from SNL and using it for our dashboards. But you mentioned something about how originally you were not great at integrating new hires and then eventually had to make that transition. And I'm thinking most small businesses are going to start out fairly insular like that. And so I'm wondering what that transition looked like for you. Yeah, and how you kind of get from point A to point B in terms of being able to integrate new people into your culture.
Yeah, it's a good question, and and one we struggled with. So I think when we originally tried to hire from the outside, and we were growing pretty fast, you just couldn't hire enough 22-year-olds to, you needed to start to hire in some people who were had more experience and had some leadership experience and things like that. I think some of the challenges before, when we were less successful, I think oftentimes we were going out and we were trying to hire industry expertise and sort of meld it into our culture. I think that was a mistake in retrospect. I think when we started to get successful, we were hiring really strong managers and leaders already, and then bringing them in, and they already, they were good. We got better at hiring good leaders than industry experts, and we could always teach them the industry stuff. They could always learn this sort of domain expertise that they needed. So I'm generally a fan of hiring strong athletes, especially for leadership jobs, general manager kind of type positions. And then they can always learn the domain stuff. And I think we sort of cracked we kind of figured it out when the first 2 or 3 people we hired who were just really strong leaders. They would have been wildly successful in any company. And we got them in, and that sort of then emboldened us to say, okay, I think we've sort of figured this out. Now, these outside men and women are doing really well. And that also just sort of, a couple of successes demonstrated that you could sort of get over the, sort of the strong culture, and also just that this was the way we were going to do business now, is that we weren't going to be able to just develop 100% of our future leadership talent, that it was going to have to be a mix. But it was a couple of people being extremely successful who were strong leaders and not sort of coming necessarily out of industry.
Right.
Most of these skills, functional skills, finance, sales, product development, technology, I mean, they're largely transferable. I don't think there's a whole lot that doesn't translate.
All right. Other questions? Well, good. Then I can ask another question. So, Mike, you talked earlier about the 4 pillars that you guys had, and I had two questions about that. One, and I want to put you on the spot if you don't remember exactly, but I was wondering what those were. Like, what did you believe in? And also, did you find that they persisted? Like, did they change over time, or what you decided in the beginning that you really proved out that was what you believed?
Yeah. So so we had sort of a couple different things. We had this sort of 4 kind of pillars of data quality, of data quality, because I mean that's what we were. We were a
Mhm.
sort of we were a data business, and those were accuracy, timeliness, completeness, and relevance. Those were our sort of that any product that we produced had to meet that test. And Trisha's here; she probably remembers that. They were on tissue boxes in the conference room on the four sides. But that's what we talked about around data, and it was sort of this very, very high standard. Like we wouldn't. We tried not to put anything out into the market that weren't the best in the market across those four dimensions. So that was one thing. On the kind of the operating principles, there were sort of 5 or so. So a couple of them. One was around long-term thinking, which is basic. Like we certainly weren't the only people who said, "Oh, we're gonna take a long-term approach," but it is it's hard to stick to, and it even dictated things like how patient we would be when we were doing acquisitions. We did a number of small acquisitions, and the way it played out there is we could be patient. If we thought we were buying the right asset that was going to be really important to us 5 or 10 years down the road, then we would do that. I mean, we could stretch out kind of our return expectations on M&A because we were always thinking about the long-term kind of value of the franchise and not just, well, we have to earn back this investment in 18 months. And we would say, well, maybe 5 years is okay, or maybe 6 years is okay. So that was one of them. What else? I mean, we had a very strong statement about customers that I can't sort of rephrase right now. And we had a very strong statement around sort of a kind of a merit-driven approach to talent development. And we didn't care, what school you went to, whether you had an MBA. Like we didn't care about any of that stuff. What we wanted to care about was, how you really did on the job and sort of work ethic and those kinds of things. And there were a couple more that I should remember, but I don't.
And do you feel like they kind of persisted? In other words, you didn't change those over time, and those.
They did. I mean, as I said earlier, I mean, we sort of when I got to S&P and we were sort of doing this massive integration, on the division that we sort of kind of assumed responsibility for at S&P. I mean, they didn't have that. Like they and so we effectively took ours and we said, this is what we now believe across this much bigger business. And maybe we made a couple of tweaks, but I think the same things applied. And we're going to either make us successful or not at 2 billion versus 300 million.
Very good. Other questions for Mike?
Mike.
Roman?
Oh, go ahead, Roman.
Hey, Rum.
Hey, thank you for your insights. So, how would you recommend hiring people for a small startup like ours that doesn't have a proven track record of and a lot of revenue? So as a 21-year-old, I don't have that many connections of people who are willing to, with experience, who are willing to just jump ship and start working with us. And it also seems like there's this chicken or the egg problem where we have to hire a strong team before we approach the investors, but we can really hire a strong team before we get the investors. And so I'm just wondering if you have any insight into that.
It's a great question. I probably don't have a ton of insight for you, but I understand that. I think maybe a couple things that are helpful. I think there are a lot of people, more people now than there were 20 years ago, who really are looking to work in smaller companies and are less focused on this sort of big career ladder corporations. That's my impression, which I think would be helpful to startups. I would say the other thing is there are lots of, so around finance in particular and some other functions, there are more sort of blank as a service that I think you can use than you'd be able to. So sort of CFO as a service, maybe even some on the technology side. I don't know about marketing, but being able to tap into some of these sort of consulting type companies that have been set up to sort of lend fractional help to startups, I think is another way you can plug certain holes. I mean, maybe not your core value proposition holes, because I think there you're gonna want to hire in probably full-time people for that. But for instance, if you felt like, well, I actually need a decent finance person or whatever before I go out to, I think you can solve that with sort of fractional help than maybe without having to try to go convince an established CFO to come work at your startup. But I don't know. The rest of the group here probably knows better than I do on those things.
There are marketing, fractional marketing companies. And somebody you might consider talking to, Roman, is Fahrenheit Advisors. They can help guide you on some of that. I have a question for Mike, if I could.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about, it's not a specific question, but can you talk a little bit more about the acquisition of SNL by S&P Global? What was that disruption like? Were you worried about the impact that the acquisition was going to have on the Charlottesville community? Worrying about layoffs, worrying about livelihoods. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. That wasn't a huge concern. And I'm not so close to it anymore, but I think that at least for the first, at least during I stayed for 3.5 years, we had more people here than we had more people here in early 2019 than we did in mid 2015. So there was growth here. I don't know if that's continued or not. It's probably hard to tell too, because of the whole work from home thing, like where people really are. But not too much. I mean, we knew that there were going to be a few areas where some people, mostly senior people, were going to move on. Mostly in the function, kind of the G&A areas. So HR and finance primarily. So we had some people leave who immediately moved over to and found great stuff at other places like World Strides and CFRA or CFA, CFRA. Yeah, no, the other one. Anyway, over in Peter Jefferson, CFRA. Yeah, it's a different thing than the CFA Institute. Anyway, so we knew that was going to happen. I wasn't that worried about it because for two reasons. One is the what it took to produce the product set that generated $300 million of revenue, which was the whole basis of the acquisition. There wasn't a lot of overlap with the other parts of S&P. So it's not like you could take out 20% of it and still produce the product that was growing 15% a year and sort of doing its thing. So I wasn't that worried about it on that side. And then the other advantage, I mean, most of S&P in the US was in New York. And I don't think we took full advantage of it. I think actually it would be interesting to see now. But I felt like there was a real opportunity actually to grow more significantly down here for people who might be ready and willing to get out of the city. And again, I think now maybe there's even more of that. But this I thought was a great hub. There's some capacity in the building at the time. I thought it was a great opportunity to say, hey, we've got spots for 50 or 100 people to either, as people leave, replace their jobs down here, offer them the ability. And there were some people who were hired down here and moved down here, not in our division, but in some of the other, kind of corporate functions and stuff like that. So very similar to what, there's a company in our world called CoStar that I think has opened an office in Charlottesville now over in Derry. Incredible business. It's a commercial real estate data business, a total juggernaut, like $30 billion market cap. And they were in DC, downtown for a long, long time, still are. But I think they have like 800 people in Richmond now. So they thought if I move, 2 hours south, cheaper rent, lower labor costs, small commutes, like all that stuff.
Right.
They're on it. And I think the same opportunity is there for New York firms and others, including S&P, to take advantage
Yeah.
of that
And
down
one
here.
good thing when the acquisition was announced, I worried. I know the media called and said, how is this going to impact, the people? And my thought was, well, there'll be some transitions. And the good thing about Charlottesville is there's plenty of places for talent to land at all levels. Right?
Which is different than 20 years ago.
It
20
is.
years ago, and I think, and for those of you who've been around, I mean, the challenge in actually hiring senior people down to Charlottesville was always, well, if this doesn't work out, I mean, there
Where
were
we
like
go.
maybe five CFO jobs in town that were like ours.
That's right.
So if that doesn't work out, maybe not even five. If that doesn't work out, what else? Like, am I going back to Northern Virginia? Am I going back to New York? And I think it's still a challenge at the top, the sort of biggest of the corporate ladder jobs.
Yeah.
But there's so much more here than there was 20 years ago. That's for sure.
And we worked really hard to make sure that happened.
Yes.
All of us.
All right. Well, very good. Other questions before we wrap up our time with Mike? Yeah, I want to thank you so much, Mike, for taking time out this morning and sharing this with us. It's been great.